The Stultifera Navis event releasing in early November offers a 6-star selector pack from the store for around $30. It contains every unit up to Fartooth, and this video will attempt to provide a guide on which ones to pick based on their meta viability. Without further ado, this is the list on screen, and the rest of the video will focus on justifications as well as elaborations on what these operators do. First off though, some context for the highlighted operators. The ones in Cyan are upcoming in the Gold Certificate shop, maximally in 1 to 2 months, so if you're considering purchasing them that way, it's more prudent to select someone else from the selector. For the ones highlighted in yellow, they are strong in general content, however the place they really shine is Contingency Contract and other forms of high difficulty gameplay, such as Bagpipe with DP risks, Suzerain with a selection of other buffers and debuffers, as well as Nightingale nullifying or arts damage. The list is an overview and not a specific guide on CC, general content or other game modes, so you could consider these operators highlighted in yellow as being 1 or 2 tiers higher than their actual ranking here when considered in a CC context. For the operators in the EX tier, the ranking is pretty self-explanatory, and although Mudrock might be slightly weaker than the other 2 options in a general context, she makes up for it with a ridiculously high power ceiling as demonstrated in Chapter 10. Thorns is the weakest out of the 3 here, and you might want to consider picking someone in the S tier if you already have a lane holder such as La Pluma or Blaze. He's an amazing operator to build around, however if you're a more established player and looking for picks that you can just simply slot into your teams without much thought, then Mountain in the S tier might be a better consideration for you. Speaking of which, the S tier. This contains operators that are just generally solid and will fit into most scenarios. The most prominent operator in this tier is Kal'tsit, lying at the boundary between S and EX tier, given the immense true damage provided by Monster. In particular, many of the recent AK events have a very heavy focus on artificial difficulty, such as dodge, damage mitigation, and so on, all of which true damage avoids. Silverash and Eyjafjalla are yet again incredibly dominant options. If you're missing both of them, a newer player might prefer Eyjafjalla more due to the ease of use, whilst a player who's doing aspirational content might prefer Silverash. Lastly, there's Bagpipe, who's a god in CC, however doesn't shine that hard in general content, although she is still a very solid unit. In A tier, the units are still incredibly powerful, but don't make the cut due to either some restrictions in usage or just weaker power overall. Suzerain and Saria are the 2 support operators which make it this high, both offering incredible amounts of utility with their skill 3s. Next up we have Exia, who excels at stacking buffs to reach the highest theoretical single target damage numbers, alongside Ifrit, who reduces the res of a 100 res enemy down to the 40s. They are still very strong in their own right and can be used as standalone units, but the ideal use case comes when paired with a team specifically built for them. Blaze is here by virtue of the assumption that if you're going down to A tier, you already have Kal'tsit, Thorns, and Mountain, all of which are significantly stronger than her in almost every way possible. She still sees use, however, in scenarios such as Low Step or Chapter 10, so she's not a horrible pick by any means. Lastly, we have Phantom and Shots, both of which have small caveats to them which you might want to consider. Phantom's main skill, skill 2 in my opinion, has progressively decreased in power over time given how Hypergriff are making enemies harder and harder. To this end, many players are substituting Phantom out for operators such as Nil the Radiant Knight as their heli drop of choice. This by no means makes him bad, but if you're already running multiple heli drop assassins in your squad, it might be better to consider someone else. As for Shorts, she's an incredibly strong unit now, sure, but in around 3 months when Ideal City drops on EN, the operator named Pozemka, which is the off-limited on Gavil's banner, completely destroys her in every way possible, and you can't really use both of them in the same squad given their tau restrictions. Half of the units in B are stuff that excels incredibly well in contingency contract content, but isn't really required in a general scope. Nightingale nullifies arts damage, true, but the only instances of that being super relevant in general content is JT 8-3 and H8-4, and many players swear by her as a Talopsis side grade at best. Psylocke is in a weird spot for general use considering that her skill 1 is essentially just a version of Myrtle and Elysium's skill 1, while her skill 2 doesn't have much applications in general use. That leaves her skill 3, which offers DP generation comparable to a 2-block Pioneer Vanguard, whilst offering a decent amount of utility. It's not bad per se, but in general content, if you're going to use buffers and debuffers, you might as well just go for the strongest option available given that roll compression on DP generators isn't the most pressing concern. Weedy is of course a great high-risk unit due to how many higher-level strategies that push can enable. The issue with this in general use is that the stages are generally simple enough to the point where you don't need to formulate these articulate strategies to beat them, and therefore Weedy drops down a bit. Saga's a fairly solid unit, there's nothing much to talk about, so I'm skipping her. Blemishen offers an incredible amount of utility with skills 2 Sleep that has popped up time and time again in various CCs as well as daily CCs. She's certainly an invaluable toolkit unit to have, but the odds are in a lot of scenarios you'll be better off just brute forcing through it. Archetto is the weakest option on the list and honestly should be in the middle of B to C tier, but I put her slightly higher given that she's incredibly strong in Sniper Knights as well as having good synergies in IS2 with the Pasta, Reagent, and Spinach relics. In addition, for dealing with pure anti-air stuff such as in East Armory or West Armory, most players would prefer her to Exusiai. C tier contains a bunch of more niche or utility focused units that are either lacking in power or lacking in specificity for them to make it to the upper ranks, as well as one interesting addition, Skadi, which I'll talk about soon. To preface though, Angelina, Carnelian, and Kyobie do remain as solid DPS options for the arts class if you do have them, but in the context of the Selector, there's really no reason to pick them over Eyjafjalla or Surtur, and if you have the above two in your squad, you generally wouldn't be using Kyobie and Angelina and the like for general purpose arts damage. To that end, the placement and evaluation of the operators in the C tier go by their specific niche, which they excel at outside of being just a generic arts damage unit. To this end, Rosa is great for skill 3 bind, Kyobie is great for dealing high total damage to high defense targets, Passenger is more of a jack of all trades master of none who excels in IS2, but his general power level is enough to keep him above the D tier. Angelina minimally still has skill 2 for slow and skill 3 for weight reduction, so she remains viable in that regard, and Carnelian has a semi-powerful skill 3 as well as a very consistent bind on skill 2. Fartooth, on the other hand, retains a powerful niche in the infinite range category, however that's only really shown up in 2 to 3 maps where it's useful. In addition, she has the ignore dodge thing, which is very prevalent in future events given how much Hypergrowth likes to stuff dodge into things. However, a lot of other operators such as Shrots and Pozemka are getting modules that also allow them to do the same thing, and their roles overlap heavily. Lastly, we have Skadi. This placement is solely due to her resource intensiveness rather than her performance, given that if we were looking at strictly performance alone, she would probably be in B tier. Now you might be wondering, isn't Skadi a pretty bad 6-star and isn't she supposed to be below all of the other units? Well, her module, which is releasing in the future during Lingering Echoes, changes all of that. Her redeployment time is further decreased by 20 seconds from 60 seconds to 40 seconds. Given how every regular wave in Arknights is on average 50 seconds, this more or less prepares her for every wave, which is very instrumental for a duelist. Paired with the increasing enemy difficulty that Hypergrowth has been pushing, it's not really a stretch to say that if you do not have Scouter in your squad, she is a contender for the spots of Phantom as well as Know the Radiated Knight as a sweet spot between them. The downside, however, comes in the form of hefty module costs, wherein module level 3 to make an operator viable isn't really the best general recommendation, especially for a 6-star selector. So that's why Skadi is in C tier. Ignoring the obvious ones like Hoshiguma and Shining in the D tier, there's 2 operators which may distinctly stand out, them being Mostima and Ch'en, given that I'm evaluating everyone with their module level 3. The 3 main issues with Ch'en are the fact that Chowder exists, the fact that Irene exists, and also the harsh investment cost you need for those marginal benefits. For another 6 months, you can't really use Ch'en alongside her outer Chowder, who is arguably the strongest operator in the game, so there's not a ton of reason to invest in her unless you don't have Chowder. Furthermore, in the upcoming Stultifera Navis event, Irene is released, which is more or less a stronger version of Ch'en, who manages to compete with Mod 3 Ch'en at only Mod 1 herself. This, coupled with the fact that module level 3 costs are inordinate and therefore she would have been bumped down a tier either way, makes her a solid D pick. The cost issue also applies to Mostima, of course, and the slow is generally much less impressive than first thought. A fat 90% slow seems amazing on paper, sure, but then you realize that sluggish is 80%, and in general content, Suzerain isn't even used much, and in the instances where she is used, it's generally more for the damage amp than the slow. Mostima can definitely have a slot in more hyper-specific strategies, however as a general unit I still cannot recommend her, especially given the level of investment needed just to have a slightly worse Suzerain. As always, questions are available in the comments as well as in my Discord server, which is linked in the description, and I'll always try to respond within a few hours. The best of luck for your Stultifera Navis pools, and may you have a great day.